I'm Andrew Penland, and I work in the Department of Mathematics and Computer Science at Western Carolina University. I'm very thankful to have the opportunity to talk to you today. I hope that you will find some of what I say valuable, but even more than that, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about the things that I say. I cannot discuss teaching without acknowledging the influences and the people, places, gave me such a strong background to get started and have continued to influence my practice. I have a strong relationship with Western Carolina University because not only do I work here, I was a student for 5 years here. So I've spent a total of 11 years in this place. And I absolutely love this university and the region where it is situated. I think in a lot of ways, I'm a collage of the other people who work in my department because I saw so many examples of effective teaching and I just stole ideas wherever I could. And I've continued to steal ideas. My office is across from two of the main teaching classrooms that are used by the department. And often I just leave my door open and hope that I can eavesdrop on what other teachers are doing. In addition, I need to thank my family. They were and are incredibly patient teachers in their own right. My wife is an early childhood educator. My mother was a speech pathologist and my father was a pastor. And all of them, in their own ways, made a commitment to changing the lives of others by sharing what they know. Over the past year and a half, we've had to look carefully at a lot of our teaching practices. For myself, I always enjoyed a highly interactive classroom that fed off of students' curiosity and energy. In adapting to virtual teaching and hybrid teaching, and even in-person teaching where we had to maintain social distance, it forced me to think less about the practice and more about the principles that I could use in any situation. And I've identified 3 principles that I think form the foundation of my teaching practice. And these 3 principles are respect, community, and joy. The first principle is respect. Before I started my PhD journey, I did student teaching at a local high school to finish my Bachelor of Science in Math education. And while I was there, I got some very good advice. Someone during this time told me that the traditional model of respect was that students automatically gave respect to the teacher and that it was viewed as a one-way flow. The advice I received was that nowadays, respect should work both ways, students to teacher and teacher to students. That was a great shift for me to make as a beginning teacher. But as I learned more, I realized that the respect the teacher owes is not only to the students, they also have a responsibility to the subject. And for me, that involves thinking about the people who developed the ideas that I'm teaching. Not only do I need to show respect to the students, I also need to show respect to the material and to the people who contributed to the class that we are in. And as I've taught more, I've realized the second thing. It's important to create a community where students respect each other. I can make the commitment to create a respectful environment where students feel comfortable by my own actions. But I also, through my actions, need to make sure that students know they are expected to extend that same respect to each other. And hopefully, if I am effective, that we can also see students understand that we are engaged in a human activity and that the people who did the amazing work and who trod the paths in which we follow deserve our attention, our respect. We should know their name. We should understand things about them. And we should view the work that they created not only as a means to an end, not only to do excellent engineering or business or chemistry, but also as an amazing accomplishment in its own right. I'd like to say, respect should work all ways. So you may have noticed that this talk is titled, Any Questions? The reason that I chose that title is I believe that asking questions is one of the fundamental unifying aspects of mathematics. Think about this with me and see if you agree. What do we do in our research? Our papers seek to answer questions. Often at the end of a paper, we will see further questions that the author suggests. When we are PhD students writing our dissertations, the questions our advisor gives us to investigate are a blessing. Think about what we do when we teach. On exams, we ask questions that assess student knowledge. And in our classrooms, hopefully, we invite student questions. So I would like to invite you to think about what were the last 3 to 5 mathematical questions that you either asked yourself or had someone else ask you. I think in creating an environment of respect, one of the things I have found on a personal level, before I was a mathematician, I was a journalist. Before I was a journalist, I was an incredibly curious child. Looking for a broader theme to my life, I hit upon the fact that I had always been interested in asking questions. As a child, my family and I played a game called 20 Questions, which begins with, I'm thinking of a person, place, or thing. So I might say, I'm thinking of a person. And my family members would ask questions to try to hone in on how that worked. And then the other players would ask questions to see exactly what I was thinking of. This was a great game for long car rides. If you think about the kinds of questions that children ask, they ask a wide variety of, all of them are authentic. I think that for a mathematician, asking questions is an incredibly crucial skill. And so as a teacher and as a mentor of students, one of the things I want to do is be sure that I teach the skill of asking questions. In thinking about this as a learning objective, I have to ask, can this actually be done? And to be honest, I'm not sure. It's a difficult thing to quantifiably and objectively assess, certainly. My own sense is that my students are natural question askers, that people are natural question askers. Often we ask any questions, and I wonder, what are we expecting? What are we expecting when we ask that? What are we hoping for? What objective do we have in mind? We need to allow time for questions. One of my teaching mentors told me anytime you ask for questions, you need to count to 10 afterwards to make sure that there's space, both for students to formulate their question and to ask their question. But what kinds of questions are we expecting? An early assignment in any class that I can give my students is email me a question. Just ask whatever you're thinking at this juncture in the class. Of course, we will immediately recognize different kinds of questions. We might differentiate between external questions that students ask and internal questions that students ask. For an internal question, we might see something like, what is the derivative of f of x equals x squared? What kind of function is this, power or exponential? What are some instances where we need to use product rule? Why isn't the derivative of f times g of x what you think it would be? See many examples of external questions, and sometimes these can be irritating to us as instructors. You might get questions like, is that a 3 or a 5? Do we need to know this formula for the exam? What do I need to make on the final to get an A? How will doing well in calculus help my future career? I've intentionally labeled these so that they kind of go from what you might call lower level questions to higher level questions. Of the many valuable ideas I learned at Western Carolina University, taking Bloom's taxonomy seriously was probably one of the most valuable. Here's an image licensed under Creative Commons by Extrina Law. It illustrates Bloom's taxonomy. Of course, many of you are familiar with it. Bloom's taxonomy lays out that thinking skills go from the lowest order, which is simply remembering things, up to the highest order, which is creating. It's valuable to think of the fact that a pyramid cannot exist without a base. It's easy for us to think as mathematicians and teachers that this is the best question on this list, but that's not true. Every question has value. And I say this so emphatically because I have to remind myself of it. By creating an environment in which we respect students and their questions, in which we value the things that they want to know, this creates a learning community. One of the questions I always want to ask students early, what are the reasonable expectations? And that goes 2 ways, for the students, for the instructor. I extend that and say, what are the reasonable expectations for each of these groups inside of class, outside of class? Often, my students have difficulty coming up with answers to these questions at first. And I ask them why, and they tell me it's because they have never been asked these things before. They didn't feel that anyone has considered their opinions in the past. But for myself, I cannot feel good about teaching unless I feel learning is occurring. And I can't feel good about learning unless I feel that there's a community involved in that learning. By making space for questions, I learn a lot. My students ask questions that I never would have thought of. Presents an exciting challenge. I now get a chance to try to see the material in a new way. When we think about community, we're thinking about relationships. I'm curious, what do you think is the right relationship between questions and answers? When students ask a question in class, what are they expecting? When the instructor asks a question in class, what are they expecting? Students ask a question outside of class. What are they expecting? When the instructor asks a question outside of class, what are they expecting? To me, this relationship in between questions and answers highlights how we might view these things differently in teaching versus research. And in research, really, the answers are valuable, but we pursue the questions regardless of whether or not we expect to get an answer. And in the research community, we understand that. In teaching, are we able to hold that same idea? Is it even appropriate to do so? So how is our teaching perspective on questions different than our research perspective? So again, I emphasize in building community and in treating students with respect that all questions have value. I believe that's because all questioners have value. Each person we encounter has had a different individual experience with mathematics. People naturally have different ways of thinking about things. So all questions have value. All questioners have value. And so a question I keep coming back to is, how do I work to build community? I don't think there's any controversy in this statement. And I guess I would ask you as colleagues and people whose opinion I respect, what are the different ways that we can identify? What are the different ways of thinking about mathematics that you have seen? It's been very helpful to me to think about the rule of four, which I first learned as a student, a calculus book by Deborah Hughes Hallett. And in the book, it introduces four ways of thinking about a function. And those, roughly speaking, are verbally, visually, numerically, and symbolically. And of course, there are many different ways that you might have thought about thinking about mathematics, but let's focus on these four for a minute. My question in thinking about this is, do we think that all four ways are equally important? If we do think that, does that show up in our teaching? And in particular, does it show up on our assessments? Do our exams represent a roughly equal proportion between these four different types? Do our exam questions? If we looked at the kinds of questions that we ask and expect students to answer in assessing their performance, what percentage would we put in each of these four categories? What percentage should be in each of these four categories? And again, I don't know, but this is a discussion I'm very interested in having. The final principle of teaching that I mentioned is joy. I'm really having a lot of fun talking about these things. And in particular, the reason that I enjoy teaching so much is I enjoy asking questions. I enjoy thinking about questions. You can use the term fun equally well in this context. I find learning fun. I hope to share that with my students. I believe that creating a joyful experience is important. It's true that mathematics can be incredibly financially lucrative. I don't think many of our students realize how high the median income for mathematicians is. We certainly out-earn accountants and engineers if you look at the entire population. But even more than that, I just find mathematics really fun. I'm excited when I get to go to class and talk to people about it. I'm excited when I get to talk to you about it right now. By creating a community, we're able to experience this together. Think about what types of questions do we really enjoy asking? Why is it that sometimes questions in mathematics classes fill people with dread? Can you imagine how joyless a mathematical class without questions would be? Studying mathematics, especially mathematics as hard as calculus or anything beyond, is incredibly difficult. It's demanding, yet many people enjoy it a lot. Do our students understand that? Do they understand why we enjoy mathematics? What questions might they ask us about our mathematical journey if we open that door? So as you can tell, I really like questions. These are questions I've been considering, and in being asked to talk about teaching, these are questions that popped into my mind that I wanted to share. And I mean that in an authentic sense. I hope that throughout this, it's clear that I don't think I have any perfect answers about these things. And what I'm interested in is an authentic dialogue. When I asked you to think with me, I meant it. And when I said that I wanted your answers, I really do. I hope you'll consider getting in touch with me. My personal email is andrewpenland@gmail.com. And I will be grateful for whatever perspective you can share on the mathematics classrooms that you've been in, and the research experiences that you've had, and the types of questions that you've seen asked, seen answered, and your own personal perspective and approach on questions. Thank you so much for being present with this talk. And finally, of course, I have one final thing to say, which is traditional. Any questions? Thank you.